Joining me live now is former Prime Minister of Sweden and co-chair of the European Council on Foreign Relations, Bildt. Thank you very much for your time on Sky News today. There's a lot happening, from NATO's future to Ukraine, the EU's next moves, and why Greenland is suddenly back in play. Let's start with Greenland. What do you make of the interest there?
It's difficult to explain. It seemed to be an obsession by President Trump. There was an element of that in his first term that disappeared, and then suddenly it re-emerged with big force, supported by J.D. Vance and Stephen Miller and others. And then he escalated and started to threaten in the run-up to the Davos meeting, and then suddenly backtracked, and it's been silent since then. But I don't think the issue is gone. He clearly has his designs on Greenland, no longer threatening military action, but threatening some sort of action, threatening the territorial independence or integrity of Denmark and the right of self-determination of the Greenlanders. It has caused quite a reaction throughout Europe.
I mean, it's suddenly gone from remote and frozen to strategically priceless. Are we prepared for how fast great power competition is moving into the Arctic? I mean, Greenland's Prime Minister is clearly not backing down here, but is Europe underestimating just how aggressively Russia and China are already positioning themselves around the area?
Not necessarily. I think we are aware of it. I don't think, if you talk about China's interest in the Arctic, it's primarily in the part of the Arctic that is by the Bering Sea. Where where Russia and Alaska meet. We haven't seen much of Chinese activities in the European Arctic. I mean, there's a research station in Svalbard. A lot of other countries have it, but nothing that is particularly spectacular. Russia, of course, has fundamental strategic interest in the Arctic. They have their main nuclear second strike capabilities at the Kola Peninsula, and safeguarding that is critical. They're also increasingly interested in the Northern Sea route, as they call it, north of Siberia, potentially cutting the time for transit between East Asia and Western Europe by 40%. But nothing of that is particularly close to Greenland and hasn't been affected the Greenland situation and to any noticeable degree.
So a big part, obviously, as you know, of US President Trump's discussions around Greenland has been that, this need for increased security. What does that security look like then? Do you believe what President Trump is saying?
And not really, to be quite honest, because he's been talking about sort of Russian and Chinese ships all over the place and around the coast of Greenland. There's nothing of the sort. I mean, I'm not aware, and I think the Danish foreign minister said that he hasn't seen anything of that for a decade at least. I don't think there had been. Well, you might go back to Soviet ships in the Second World War or something like that. But apart from that, there's nothing of that sort. So I don't see it. That being said, Greenland is part of NATO. There are US forces there, much more limited than in the Cold War. That has to do with space surveillance primarily. But there's an agreement between the Danes and the Americans, which makes it possible, had made it possible for years for the Americans to beef up their military presence to whatever level they want, really. But there hasn't been any need or desire from the American point of view so far.
I mean, there's been years of doubt and division about NATO as an alliance. Would you say, and is your assessment that it is stronger now because of what's happening in the area, or more fragile?
No question that the political mood inside the NATO alliance is less good now than it was only a couple of months ago. Because, I mean, the rhetoric of Trump, for a while, he has backed down, has to be said, but for a while threatened military action against the NATO ally. That was something that was really unthinkable. And even if it has backed down, it still produces some lingering effects, needless to say.
I want to talk to you a little bit, of course, about what's happening in Ukraine, the Russian war. I mean, Ukraine is still fighting for survival. But are Western governments quietly planning for a frozen conflict rather than a Ukrainian victory? What's the biggest mistake here in your assessment that the West has made in dealing with Russia?
I think in the beginning we underestimated what the Russians were, what Putin was intending to do. For a while, we also overestimated his military ability to do it. I mean, a lot of people expected when he launched the war in February of 22 that he would conquer Ukraine in, if not days, at least weeks, because we had a rather inflated view of the Russian army. So far, after nearly 4 years of war, after well over 1 million casualties, he has managed to capture 20% of the country. But his war, he's pretty determined, he's addicted to it. And then we've had sort of the backs and forths of the Trump effort. So we don't know where this is going. But for Europe, this is a fairly existential question. The defense of Ukraine today is the defense of Europe tomorrow. And that is why there is so solid support among the Europeans for the defense, sovereignty, and independence of Ukraine.
I mean, at this moment of global instability, and that's probably a bit of an understatement, but what keeps you awake at night about Europe's future? I mean, you were a former Prime Minister. What keeps you awake or concerns you about Europe's future?
That we have to strengthen our independent capabilities of different sorts. I mean, we don't want to break with Americans, but if the Americans walk away in another direction or simply take no substantial interest in European security, we have to do it on our own, undeniably. And we do face a Russian threat against Ukraine, for certainly. What comes beyond that, we don't know. I saw Mr. Putin said today that there is no plans to launch aggression against the rest of Europe. Yeah, he says that, but he says the same thing. He said exactly the same thing about Ukraine. So trust in Russia is non-existent. So we need to beef up our own capabilities in order to be able to handle more of this particular situation on our own.
Do you believe Europe can realistically defend itself without American leadership?
I think we can. We are dependent upon the Americans at the moment for what we call strategic enablers of different sorts. Some of that we can create ourselves. It would take some time, but it's not impossible. We are dependent upon them for sort of strategic nuclear deterrence. We have the British and the French nuclear deterrence, but it's not quite the same as Russian. So there we are dependent upon the Americans. But apart from that, our combined economies are, of course, far greater than the Russian one. We have more men under arms than Russia has. But we need to do more to coordinate and strengthen our forces, no question about that.
Carl Bildt, before we leave this interview today, I have run out of time, but I just wanted to quickly ask you your proudest moment as Prime Minister of Sweden.
Bringing Sweden into the European Union and helping the 3 Baltic nations, Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, to secure their independence.
Very good. Carl Bildt, thank you again for joining us on Sky News. It's been wonderful to chat with you.
Thank you.